For all the overexposure complaints about the Los Angeles Lakers, they're still a very compelling basketball team on the basis of LeBron James alone. And I'm glad our guest today is an NBA front office expert because to me, it's going to take somebody with that kind of expertise to highlight some kind of path for them to be compelling in May or June. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast, a sports ethos presentation hosted by yours truly, Aaron Bruski, and FSWA Hall of Famer Steve Dr. A. Alexander. Today we're talking with Trevor Lane, host at Lakers Nation and at the NBA Front Office Show, at Trevor_Lane on Twitter. And for those of you who are first-time listeners or folks that are just checking back in, we're in the middle of our 30-team trip around the NBA, talking with local experts and beat writers. We're going to talk with Trevor about both the Lakers and some salary cap expertise that can help you guys along the way. And before we quickly get into all of that, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football, from the NFL to college. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our winner-take-all $300,000 NFL Survivor pool for the upcoming season. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots. Head to the website today and use promo code BLEAV, B-L-E-A-V, and get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. Before we bring in Trevor, I know you got other things to talk about today, sir, but I want to get a quick over-under 0.5 Dalton Connect jerseys purchased for you this season.
I think it's gonna be over for me.
I don't know who that question was for, but
I don't know. Did I not say your name? I probably didn't. Applicable to both of you.
I'm a jersey fanatic, sort of, so I would not be surprised if I end up with a Dalton Connect jersey. In fact, Aaron, if you lose the trivia bet and you have to fly here and buy me a beer, you might have to bring me a Dalton Connect jersey as well.
I guess as long as I don't have to wear one. Not that I don't like Dalton Connect and not that I don't like jerseys. It's just the double whammy there. Let's go ahead and bring in Trevor. Trevor, welcome to the show. Trevor, thank you for joining us. The Lakers, you know, they are a conversation point, kind of whether we all want it to be or not. And I say that not to really disparage the Lakers, just to say, like, look, we're all going to be stuck in this bunker together. And I'm just glad that you're here to help us explain or understand, you know, maybe these games could be interesting in May and June. But before we get into all of that, you know, for folks who are not familiar with your work, can you let them know, like, how you started your career and what kind of led to where you're at right now with such a great show? And that's with you and Keith Smith, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do. Yeah. We do the NBA Front Office Show, which focuses, mostly on the major NBA news, but we look at it through the lens of the salary cap and the CBA. So that's the Front Office Show. And then with Lakers Nation, I look at things through purple and gold lenses, as I say all the time. Look at things from the Lakers perspective and break down all the news and bring in fans, and we do live shows and all kinds of stuff. But in terms of how I actually got here, I was a classroom teacher for 13 years. I taught U.S. history, and then as time went by, I started to want to do something else on the side. I wanted a creative outlet, and I turned to writing. I had done some writing back in college. Actually, I wrote fantasy basketball for a season for NBA.com back in college, which was a lot of fun. I wrote about pro wrestling for a little bit, and so I decided once I got my teaching career off the ground that I wanted to start writing again. And I decided, you know what, I want to write basketball. I want to write what I love, what I'm spending most of my time paying attention to. So I started writing a little bit, started up my own blog, and didn't really go anywhere with that, but I used it as a writing sample to pitch a few different sites and got picked up. And next thing I knew, I was at Lakers Nation, and they didn't have a podcast. And so about a year in, I raised my hand and volunteered, said, hey, I'll start a podcast, and I'll be terrible at it, but if you guys will let me kind of deal with the learning curve and everything, I'll do all the work and see if we can make this thing go. And that was almost 10 years ago now. And at this point, it eventually grew and grew and grew to the point where I left teaching behind. And now I talk about basketball all day, and I can't complain because that is an amazing thing to get to do.
I just dropped my kiddo off for his first day of TK. So knee deep in all things school and teaching and just thinking about all that stuff. What was your favorite part of that? And in terms of fantasy as well, I want to hear about that. Like, what was your 1 year writing about fantasy like?
Well, so I remember it actually was part of like a fan contest to get to write for NBA.com. And I remember that my winning piece, one of my central thesis was why Gilbert Arenas was a top 5 fantasy pick. That's how long ago this was. But fantasy was something that I got into back. Oh gosh, Michael Jordan was a Washington Wizard, so it was quite a while ago when I first got into fantasy basketball. I actually didn't play this past season. I got so enveloped with all the Lakers stuff and everything, but um, fantasy is something that I think brings so much more engagement to the game. It brings that extra layer. And certainly we talk fantasy football, fantasy baseball. I do all those things as well, but it just adds that little something extra, and it gives you a reason to go and do something fun with all your friends and have these conversations and really dig deep into the stats and what a player is doing night in, night out. It just, to me, it increases your buy-in with the league itself and furthers your knowledge of the game. So not only is it a lot of fun, not only does it have that competitive piece to it, but it's also something that, to me, it further enhanced how I view basketball and how I analyze the game and break down the game. So fantasy sports have long been something that I've enjoyed and loved doing. And so I was thrilled when you guys asked me to come on this show, because I'm like, I've been reading their work, forever. Yes, I want to come on this show and do this and talk through this stuff with you guys.
That's awesome, man. You mentioned you're like a CBA expert, and I don't know if you called yourself an expert, but I'll throw it in there. But have you come across Eric Pincus?
All the time. Yep, he's a great guy.
Because he's like the NBA money guru in my mind. Like, he's the big one. Do you have a favorite or funny story from covering the NBA? Like, a player messed with you or something crazy happened? Do you have anything like that?
Favorite story from the NBA. Oh, well, I can tell you this. So I've interviewed Metta World Peace a few times, and that is always an experience. He's fantastic. He's amazing. And he had some of the most jaw-dropping comments that I've ever heard. He was explaining to me how joining the Lakers was actually below on his preferred list than joining a team. I believe it was a team over in Greece. And as he's explaining his rationale behind this whole story and why he wanted to go join this team over in Greece rather than even play for the Lakers, and he wanted to go back to the Pacers. He wanted to go play for the Pistons after all the Malice at the Palace stuff, wanted to go play for Detroit. Then there was a team in Greece, then the Lakers on his totem pole here, or his pecking order of what he preferred to do this offseason. And as he's describing this, I'm just thinking, oh, this is the only guy that would have this thought process in terms of picking a team, but he wanted to go become a legend in Europe. And that was just, I thought, the craziest story over potentially winning a championship with the Lakers. He valued going and cementing his status in Europe over that. It's just the first thing that comes to mind when I think of crazy things that a player has said while on the show. And my whole thought process at the time, as he's going through this whole story, is just, there's no one else in the league that I would have interviewed that could have this exact story or would think of things the way that this guy does.
That's awesome.
He's got all sorts of stories like that laying around the league. CBA stuff is largely beyond me. So the second apron, maybe give folks a little background on it, and then what's up with the environment behind that?
So the second apron is something that has now come in under the new CBA, and it is terrifying for NBA teams. Frankly, there are a lot of teams that will treat the second apron as though it is a hard cap. It's a ceiling they won't go past. It's right about 189 million this year. A lot of teams are going to treat it as a line they simply will not cross. They'll treat it as though it's a hard cap. You can trigger certain things and make it into an actual hard cap, but a lot of teams will simply refuse to pass the second apron. And the reason is some of the restrictions, if you go over that second apron, involve you can't aggregate two or more players into a trade. So let's say mid-season, you need to make a trade, and you've got, say, a player that's making $20 million that you want to go trade for, and you've got two guys on your team that both make 10 million, and you say, cool, let's put them together and go get that guy that makes 20 million. You can't do it. You could only send out a player individually, and that's it. You also can't send out cash in trades. You can't acquire a player using a trade exception that was previously created. There's all kinds of things that you can't do as a result of this second apron. So it is very, very difficult. Essentially, you don't get to use a taxpayer MLE. You don't get to use your full mid-level exception. Your ability to build out your roster is significantly diminished. And this was created in order to take aim at the high spending teams. The thought was, well, Steve Ballmer has infinite money. If we just continue to make the luxury tax more punitive financially, that doesn't matter for Steve Ballmer, because money has no meaning to him. So that isn't going to do anything. That's not going to stop him or the Warriors or some of these other clubs from spending money. So the way to try to rein them in is to actually take away their ability to field a competitive roster. So if you spend a certain amount, you fall into that second tier apron and all these restrictions. Essentially, all you can really do is sign veteran minimum guys. And that's caused a number of teams to make some very difficult decisions. We already saw it this summer. Look, under the old collective bargaining agreement, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is not leaving the Denver Nuggets. Paul George is not leaving the Clippers. Klay Thompson is not leaving the Warriors under the new CBA. All those guys switched teams because of this new CBA, which was designed, again, in part to take aim at the high-spending teams. A necessary and I think intentional side effect of it as well was to try to redistribute talent around the NBA. And we saw that take place a bit this summer. So that second apron, it is a scary thing for teams. It is something that most teams are not going to mess with. And as a result, they've had to make some very, very difficult decisions already.
How many teams would you say are in that range of dealing with that? And how many of them have blown over it?
You know, there's a few that have blown past it. The Boston Celtics have said, you know what, we've got so many good players already. We won the championship. We're just going to keep spending. The Suns have kept spending. Last I looked, I think it was 11 that were above the first tier apron. I'd have to go back and look now that everything is settled from free agency and see where we're at currently. But the other problem is, even if you're a team that has blown past it, if you're above the second apron for 2 years, your draft pick at the 7 years from now, your draft pick automatically moves to the back of the first round. Wow. So think about that. Like, most NBA teams only plan out for 3, 4, maybe 5 years, because that's just, because who knows what things are going to look like. So that's really scary to think that your draft 7 years from now, you could be in the midst of a rebuild. You could have the worst record in the NBA and you will have the last pick in the first round. That's a punitive measure, in addition to not being able to even trade that pick too. That's being taken away also. So even these teams that have blown past it, they're not going to do so for long. I believe they will dip back under to avoid some of those penalties within a couple of years here. And so that's kind of, the ticking clock that the teams have, that the teams are under that have gone past it.
That is fascinating information that I am totally clueless on. So this is highly educational for me. So with this CBA, do you think we're going to see, and it may change from year to year, like it sounds like last year there was a lot of movement. Do you think going forward there's going to be continue to be a lot of turnover in rosters, or do you think this is going to stabilize teams and make them want to keep everything chill and together for long term?
I think what the effect is going to be is that you're going to see teams have to continue to make these difficult decisions. What happens when teams are successful is guys get paid, right? That's what happens. You're successful, you get rewarded for it. That's the way the system works. And so teams that are successful, as they continue to improve and get better and better and better, win a championship, their role players start getting paid. And eventually those salaries start creeping up. And once you get to that second tier apron, again, many teams will treat that as a hard cap. They're going to, instead of just let's pay to keep these guys, they're going to have to make that difficult choice of, okay, we're going to let this guy walk away and he's going to go join some other team. And that, I think, is going to create two really important keys here for the NBA moving forward. And number one is that teams that are good are not going to be able to stay good to just continue to pay to keep all of their players. They're going to have to make those tough decisions. And that's going to create kind of the life cycle of a team. The NBA, they don't want one team sitting at the top for 2 decades. They don't want the Sacramento Kings missing the playoffs for 2 decades. Or for 17 years, I'm sorry. They want this to be cyclical. So teams that are bad for a little bit, they're going to get better. Eventually, they're going to get expensive as they continue to find success. They're going to have to make some tough decisions with players. They're going to take a little bit of a step back, and around we go as other teams will come up. And that way you don't have fan bases that are left out in the cold for long periods of time. The NBA wants fans to be engaged all season long. That's part of the reason for the in-season tournament. It's also part of the reason for the play-in situation that they've created. They want fans to be engaged for longer stretches of the regular season, as well as year in, year out not just whenever the team happens to be good once every couple of decades. And so there's that effect. I also think what this is going to do is it's going to create more of an incentive for teams to develop players, because as those players that are those role players, high level role players, as they get paid and eventually wind up having to be moved off to other clubs in order to avoid that second tier apron, you've got to have replacements for them. Look at how important Christian Brown is now with the Denver Nuggets, with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope on the way out. You've got to have that fresh talent on a cheaper, cost-controlled contract coming in, and that means young players on rookie deals. So I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on player development. We're going to see that moving forward, but we're also going to see more of a life cycle of a team because of these new rules.
I have like 3 follow-ups to that. I'll go with 2. One is sort of you trying to get into maybe the NBA's head, and it's just a curiosity for me. Like, do you think they see value in dynasties? Like, you think back to the 80s, it's Lakers and Celtics, and, the Golden State Warriors maybe didn't have the same impact. Maybe they didn't see that same, bump in terms of mythology for the league. And maybe that was in the decision making here. But do you think that this is a move away from dynasties? Is probably, I'll just leave it at that. Do you think the league is moving away from dynasties in general as like a pre-planned concept?
100%. Yeah, I think they're definitely moving away from it. And there's an argument to be made for dynasties, right? Those teams draw a lot of eyeballs, but I think the NBA sees like NFL style parity, and they want that. They would prefer to see that exist in the league. And so that's the path that we're going down, and that's the path that they're going to pursue. And it will be at the detriment of dynasties. They don't want any one team sitting at the top for 3, 4, 5 years. They want fans of a lot of teams feeling like, hey, we've got a real shot. That they believe is the path forward.
Yeah, I would like to get Nate Jones on the show, basketball agent / basketball commentator, just to see if he would agree with that approach. With that being said, with the other follow-ups I had, I'm trying to combine it into one question here. So trade deadline, player movement, you're talking about teams that can't keep their players. Do you think that results in more movement at the trade deadline?
I would think that, yes, there's a number of teams that would like to improve, would like to make a move. I think what we've seen happen this summer is that it's actually stifled movement to a degree because of teams being so concerned with that second tier apron and not wanting to go past it.
And then lastly, what about the idea that if young players are the path forward for a lot of teams? I know each player will be different because of their contract when they get in the league, where they were drafted, et cetera. But do you think there will be a focus on sort of almost like hiding those guys, suppressing them, or is that just too much tinfoil?
No, yeah. See, here's what I think would happen in that situation, because everybody talks, right? Everybody talks around the NBA. Agents are obviously a big part of this. And if it was felt like a team was on purpose suppressing a player solely so they don't have to pay him so much on his next contract, that would get around pretty quick. And it would be a bad look. Players around the league would not be happy about that. There would be that negative reputation that would come with that team. And I think overall it would be more of a detriment than it would be worth it if a team developed a reputation as being one that on purpose holds young players back, stops them from being, the level of player that they would want to be, or doesn't give them the kind of minutes that they deserve, because that would dissuade future free agents or future, potential trade candidates from wanting to join that franchise. So I get the incentive there to potentially do it, but in this situation, I think the juice would not be worth the squeeze.
Interesting.
So you're a Lakers guy and you're a front office guy. What did you think about the Lakers front office, how they handled the offseason, and what does it mean for this coming season?
I mean, let's be honest, it was a disaster of a summer for the Lakers. They didn't do anything. This is a team that had LeBron James and Anthony Davis, who looked great with Team USA. Won a gold medal. LeBron was the MVP, the FIBA MVP, and those guys showed they still have it, and yet the team was unable to make any moves. I mean, they added Bronny, they added Dalton Connect. that's it. They were one of only a few teams in the NBA to not add anybody via free agency, to not add anybody via the trade market. And that's not to say they were just, fans want to joke, Rob Pelinka, the GM is just asleep. He's at Disneyland. He's not paying attention and all that kind of stuff. It's a much more complicated situation. There's a lot going on in terms of why they didn't make any specific moves, and other moves have to come to follow it, and what their goals are, and all of that gets wrapped up in. But the bottom line, did they improve the team? Did they build out a team that can potentially win a championship? To this point, the answer is no. And heading into an age 40 LeBron James season here, that I think is not acceptable to a lot of fans, to a lot of people around the league looking at this saying they've got to do something. And that is part of the issue too. Teams that the Lakers would like to trade with are saying, hey, you have to do something. So we need top dollar if we're going to send you any kind of assets. So the trade negotiations have been easy for them, but this is a results oriented business. Did they improve the team this summer? No, they didn't. So it's not been a good summer in that regard.
What about so you mentioned the complexity of the offseason, but then the bottom line result is that they didn't improve. I think that there's a lot there. We could spend a lot of time on that in of itself, but let's kind of skip that and let's go to now. I mean, you're as intimately aware of what's available out there, reading the chessboard. Have you been able to draw a straight line or even a foggy path from them currently where they're at to where they could be as championship contenders? Is that out there right now?
Is it available to them right now? I don't think so. I think if it was, they would make that move. I don't think the Lakers are hell-bent on keeping their future draft capital. I think they would move it if they felt like it was moving them to contending status. I think that deal has not materialized, but I think the model to look at is last year's Dallas Mavericks. I don't think the Lakers are going to go add Trae Young, say, or obviously DeJounte Murray wound up going to the Pelicans. He was a name that was linked to the Lakers quite a bit. Donovan Mitchell was a pipe dream for fans of 29 teams, right? A lot of people were looking at him, but rather than that big name, I think it's more of do you bring in multiple players that combined with what you've already got can get you to that next level. So I mentioned the Dallas Mavericks. You bring in PJ Washington, you bring in Daniel Gafford. Can the Lakers find a couple of guys like that? Where are they all stars individually? No, but add them to your roster and they give you enough firepower to maybe make that finals push as the Mavs did. I think that's more the path the Lakers are going to walk down. The challenge being that the primary salary matching pieces that they've got, D'Angelo Russell and Rui Hachimura, those are starters for them. And so you can't just give up those guys without getting significant upgrades if you're going to surrender future draft capital as well. You have to know that the player you're getting back is going to provide something more than what D'Angelo Russell provides, more than what Rui Hachimura provides. They don't have like a big expiring salary from a player that doesn't really give them much to ship out in a trade and just say, look, our net is positive because we replaced a guy who's not doing much for us. The guys they'd be trading away are probably starters and significant pieces for them, whether or not they have that kind of value around the NBA. So it's a complicated situation in that regard. But yeah, it's I think that's the ultimate path, is figuring out a way to make not one move, but probably two.
You mentioned earlier Paul George leaving the Clippers and how that wouldn't have happened under this new CBA. Like, they lost Paul George for nothing. And was that shocking for you to see that? And I don't know. I just can't. Like, how was Steve Ballmer in the corner of his office on the floor crying, rolled up in a little ball?
He was probably real red. I'll tell you that. I was shocked. We talked about it all the time in the front office show, said ultimately when push comes to shove, Steve Ballmer's not going to let money prevent Paul George from staying with the Clippers. They're opening a new arena. They're not going to want to go to a new arena without Paul George. There's no way. And then as the longer and longer it went on, it started to become, well, maybe this really is a thing. Maybe he really will walk away here. So I was surprised that that's ultimately where this wound up. But that's that second apron. The Clippers looked moving forward and said, how diminished will our capabilities be to build out this roster into the future if we have Paul George on this kind of a contract? And ultimately, they looked at all the penalties that come with the CBA. And they said, yeah, we have to make this tough decision here. And they just couldn't see eye to eye with George on the contract and the structure of it and all that. I'm still surprised at where this went. And it stings for the Clippers because you look at what they gave up to get him. And I know you can say Paul George was really, or Kawhi Leonard was really part of the trade discussion, because if you don't bring in Paul George, you're not getting Kawhi. And so really you're trading for both those guys. But you gave up SGA, I think it was 5 first-round picks. And now you look at SGA is a MVP candidate year in, year out with the Thunder, and they're looking fantastic. And now the guy that you traded for just walked away for nothing. That's a tough pill to swallow for the Clippers for sure.
Do you think it was a case of the sunk cost theory really getting its fair due, and people saying, you know what, we don't care what we lost. We got to think about right now. We got to think about that second apron. Mm-hmm. And we don't think these guys can win. And that level of clarity actually paying out or paying off and winning out in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that they felt like they couldn't win, but they have had a number of opportunities here to win. And those two guys, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, as a duo, they haven't gotten it done. And some of that's been, injury related, but still they have not been able to produce at the way that the Clippers hoped that they would. And so I do think there's something to the whole idea that, hey, as much as it hurts, what's the best path? What's done is done. What's happened has happened. I look at the Brooklyn Nets years ago when they made that ill-fated trade to get Kevin Garnett and get Paul Pierce and all of those guys. Once they realized it didn't work, yeah, their picks were gone, but what was done was done. There was nothing they could do to undo that. They had to make sure they made the best decisions moving forward, and that meant rebuilding their team, even if it was going to hurt because you were going to hand over some pretty valuable draft picks. I think the same holds true with the Clippers here, not necessarily in the exact same way, but that they had to look and say, it's going to make that trade from years ago, from I believe it was 2019, hurt a bit more, but what's done is done. We did that. Now we have to move on and look to the future. What is our best path moving forward? And they decided that giving Paul George the kind of deal that he wanted was not the best path.
Yeah. And Philadelphia's gained there because that actually gives them a shot. Let's get in the weeds here. Gabe Vincent, really big fan of Gabe Vincent. Watched him a little bit locally here in the Sacramento area, but then also just his career in general, and really good in the playoffs at a time when everybody kind of thought his knee might not be capable of holding up. And then he gets to Los Angeles and then back to the injuries. So he and Jared Vanderbilt are these question marks. How much is the team and or just kind of locally, how are people approaching the question of whether they can be an answer or not? Do people feel confident in them, or is this still very much up in the air?
There's very little confidence in Gabe Vincent. Part of it is there's a little bit of that pain still left over from Kendrick Nunn from years ago. The feeling with Gabe Vincent is, oh no, here we go again, another Miami Heat guard, and he instantly gets injured with the Lakers and essentially missed the entire season. He was their non-returning big signing of that previous summer. It was Gabe Vincent. They got him for just below the MLE, and they got nothing out of him essentially over the course of the season. So, and when he was on the floor, I know there's sometimes recency bias, but when he was on the floor, he wasn't good. The shot was MIA, and some of that again may have been injury related. But so there's not a lot of confidence that Gabe is going to be that guy. There's that sentiment is out there that, well, if Gabe Vincent can go back to being what he was with Miami, if Jared Vanderbilt can stay healthy, and we know what he can do when he is healthy, then maybe those pieces do make the team a little bit better. I would always counter with LeBron played 71 games last season. Anthony Davis played 76. I'm not super confident that's going to repeat itself. So even if Gabe Vincent and Jared Vanderbilt are healthy, they absolutely help. But is that effect going to be mitigated by LeBron and Anthony Davis? Unlikely to play as many games as they did the season before. That's probably where I land. I hope those guys stay healthy. They're good dudes. They both bring something to the table. But even if they do help, I don't know that it propels the Lakers forward all that much, because I think we're going to see regression in games played for LeBron and
So I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Who do you think is the best front office in the NBA, and why?
I think, as much as it pains me to say, I think you got to look at the Boston Celtics. I think they're certainly up there. You look at what they've done. They've done an incredible job. I mean, How did they manage that Kristaps Porzingis trade? Where in my mind the pick went the wrong way. They got paid in draft capital, moving Marcus Smart and getting Porzingis back. That was a phenomenal job. Then the trade to land Drew Holiday was an excellent move as well. You got to look, maybe Milwaukee is kicking themselves at this point. Like, would they have done the Damian Lillard trade if they knew Drew was going to wind up with the Celtics? So I think the Celtics front office has done a phenomenal job. I also look at Oklahoma City. You look at, I think they've done more than just accumulate as much future draft capital as they can. I look at the team that they've built, look at the pieces that they've added, the way that they've moved everything. I think they've done a really, really phenomenal job with this. I loved the Alex Caruso addition for them this offseason. So I would put, I know you asked for who was the best. I would put those two right now, OKC and Boston, at the top, kind of side by side.
And then D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves are both with the team. Do you think they're with the team at the end of this season?
I do not. I do not. I think Reeves will be. I've been, from everybody I've spoken to within the Lakers and without, they seem pretty determined to hang on to Austin Reeves. And, look, things change in the NBA all the time. But D'Angelo Russell picked up his player option. He's an expiring contract. They were in a bunch of trade talks with him last year at the trade deadline. And I think there's some real questions about, number one, can he perform in the playoffs? Because the answer has largely been no. As good as and he really was good last season for the Lakers. He was excellent. He's a lot of fun when he gets going on a heater. But the playoffs are certainly a challenge for him. And then number two, that expiring contract that he's got now for this coming season, are the Lakers going to commit to him long term when there's some skill set overlap between D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves in terms of both strengths and weaknesses? And so moving forward into the future, is having them together as a duo, does that provide the highest ceiling? And I would say probably not. And so of the two, I think D'Angelo Russell is the more likely to get moved. So I'm going to say no. By the end of the season, they're not still both on the team. And I think it's D'Lo who ultimately gets moved.
Along those same lines, is there a type of player you think the Lakers are going to add during the season, especially if they lose D'Angelo? Like, who do you see them going after?
Yeah, I think that they're going to look for, first and foremost, they're going to look for two-way players. That's been a big problem last season. They had a lot of guys who could play offense and not defense, and D'Angelo Russell fits that category. And then they had guys who could play defense and not offense, and that's your Jared Vanderbilts, your Cam Reddish, players like that. They really need two-way guys. They need guys who can play both sides of the basketball. I think that is first and foremost a priority. They could use another wing. You kind of need to take Rui Hachimura, who gives you the offense, but not a ton on defense. He's not as bad, maybe, as some make him out to be defensively, but not a ton there. And then Jared Vanderbilt, who's all defense, no offense. You kind of need to combine those guys into one player who can do both things. That's really what you need to do. They also need a big. They need a true physical big. That's not Christian Wood. That's not Jackson Hayes. We saw it this summer, how well Anthony Davis played out there with Bam Adebayo on the floor with him. He just has a little bit more freedom to roam when there's another big on the floor to protect the rim. I'm not saying it's the go-to. There's people out there saying Anthony Davis is a 4, not a 5. I don't buy that kind of stuff. But I will say you want the option to turn to in the right situations. And so they need to go find a true physical big. Unfortunately, this year's center market has been very different than what we've seen in the past, where centers have been getting paid this summer. We still have some teams out there that are looking for a center. Look at the Pelicans right now. They still need a 5. So finding that guy may not be as easy as it would have been 2 seasons ago or before that. But that is another thing that they need to find. They need a true 5. LeBron addressed it over the summer when he made his infamous list of players that he would take less in order to play with. Jonas Valanciunas was on that list because he knew he could help Anthony Davis. So I think you need that true 5. You could use a two-way wing, and then figure out what you're going to do with your backcourt as well, splitting up that Austin Reeves, D'Angelo Russell duo, and trying to find a guy who can give you a skill set that's a little bit more complementary to Reeves.
Look, the way you're breaking it down, I think in opposition to others that I've talked with or people we've interviewed, you actually do outline a decent path. I feel like the kinds of players that you're talking, maybe not the athletic big, but like there are players that fit those archetypes that tend to pop up and be undervalued by the teams that they're actually with. So maybe I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was prior to this show that there could be meaningful games for these guys like in late May. So to speak. Switching gears to just more of under the radar thinking, is there anybody on the team that you think could be a breakout player of some type? Not like massive breakout, but something that people, okay, we didn't know that guy had it in him.
Yeah, so I'm going to defer to Austin Reeves on this. I talked to Austin Reeves a couple months ago, not even. And I asked him last year, predict who is going to have a career year for the Lakers. He said D'Angelo Russell. D'Angelo Russell certainly did. I asked him that same question. And for this year's team, he said it's going to be Max Christie. And that probably would have been my answer anyway. The Lakers paid Max Christie this summer. They believe in him. Part of the reason why Darvin Ham is not their coach anymore is because Max Christie was not developed the way that they wanted him to be, was not given a consistent role. There's belief in him moving forward that he can become the kind of two-way 3-and-D style wing / guard that a lot of teams in this league value. So I know there's a lot of excitement about Max Christie within the Lakers, and I think for good reason. Again, I don't think he's going to be a star. I think he's going to be more of kind of a Danny Green type of player, where some of what he shows, some of what he brings to a team doesn't necessarily pop out on a box score. It's stuff that you're going to have to really, really dive into and break down. Like, hey, this defensive rotation is what makes him so good. I think he's going to be that type of player, but I do think that it's the opportunity is going to be there for him to take that next step, and I believe he's going to do it.
Max Christie will be on my 30 deep team. Our 30. Drew and I play in a 30. I don't know about that,
sir. You're gonna have to compete with
team
one other fantasy GM.
We go deep. We go very, very deep. And I'm taking Max Christie, regardless of what Brew thinks. And another guy, I'm probably going to take these guys back to back. We talked about him earlier, Dalton Connect. How significant could his role be with the Lakers this year? I mean, I think he's a tremendous. I think he's like the guys you were talking about earlier. He's really good at offense, and he's not so much good at defense. But how big is his role going to be?
I think it's actually going to be fairly decent, and that's out of necessity. You look at this roster, and one of the issues that they've got is kind of a lack of depth. I mean, you've got guys, who knows what Jalen Hood-Schifino is. He didn't get to play in Summer League this year because he was recovering from injury. You've got Bronny James. He's not NBA ready. The expectation shouldn't be that he's NBA ready, but he's not NBA ready. Max Lewis showed a few things in Summer League, but he's not ready to get put into a game. There's three guys right there that you have taken up roster spots that you probably can't put into a game. Cam Reddish, where's he at? Is that somebody? Are you really going to play both Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood? No, it's probably going to be one or the other. So pretty quickly, you're whittling down the roster and getting to a point where, man, 9 or 10 man rotation, Dalton Connect's probably in there. He's probably getting minutes. And I'll tell you what, the Lakers, they didn't get in Dalton Connect for a workout before the draft. Because it was so, they tried, but it was so heavily firmly believed that Dalton Connect would not be there at 17. He was being mocked at 6 in a lot of the mock drafts the day of the draft. And so him falling to 17 was a shock. The Lakers couldn't believe their good fortune. I can tell you from speaking to people within the Lakers, they were thrilled. They can't believe that he wound up being there for them at 17. But as you mentioned, he does have that kind of one-way player issue. I think out of necessity, he's going to be in the mix. I think he's going to be good. I think he's a talented player. But I think the opportunity is going to be there because, frankly, they lost Taurean Prince. Somebody needs to fill that role. And looking at the roster, there's not a lot of other options.
I'm going to pin one question to my commentary on that is on the second unit for him to be able to add that kind of offense. It makes a lot of sense, to take the pressure off of the aforementioned LeBron James, Anthony Davis. I actually want to ask you real quick before we get out of here. Do you think there is an internal mandate either driven by the players themselves or just the team or just the collective that says, hey, we're not playing you guys this much this year. Like you're getting under 70 games and that's that. Do you think that that's out there?
They tried last year, infamously, game 1 against the Denver Nuggets last year. The Lakers were trying to make a comeback, and they pulled LeBron James with a few minutes to go in the fourth quarter because they were trying to keep him on a minutes restriction. And that was the end of that. Darvin Ham realized really quickly that, yes, we need to limit these guys, but we also need to win games. I think that's probably the way it's going to go. You look at how good the Western Conference is. You look at teams that got better. Look at the Sacramento Kings. They added DeMar DeRozan. Look at some of these other clubs that have improved in the West, and the teams that are on the rise simply organically. You look at the Houston Rockets as their young players continue to develop. Same thing with San Antonio. And I think the reality is the West is going to be so close. It's going to be such a tight race that they're going to have to play their guys if they want to wind up getting where they want to go. So I think in an ideal world, yeah, they would limit LeBron, they would limit AD, but I think they're going to find themselves in such a battle in the standings that that plan is probably going to wind up having to get scrapped at some point during the season in favor of gunning for wins, because otherwise they're not going to make it.
It's a tantalizing thing for fantasy GMs because, I mean, Anthony Davis had a massive season last year. Everybody sort of bet against him forever now. LeBron, same thing, going down into the late first round in drafts and being able to produce, like the LeBron James of old. And it could happen again, if they really do need to reach deep to get into a play-in or, to a good seed or whatever have you. That's just sitting right there. So it's going to be tantalizing for fantasy GMs on draft day. So, yep. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything we missed about the Lakers or the front office world in general that you think folks should be looking at? And is there anything you're working on right now that folks should know about?
Yeah. So the big thing is JJ Redick, right? We haven't talked a lot about him. First time head coach. He's never coached before. We know he's a bright basketball mind, but what is this going to look like? How is this all going to work? That's going to be a big storyline here for the Lakers. It's what kind of a coach is JJ Redick? There's a lot of unknown there. And how is he going to manage situations? That's going to be something that we're going to be keeping an eye on. Potentially from a fantasy perspective, there could be volatility there because we don't know how JJ is going to react. And his philosophies may change as the season goes on. And really, they should. The way that he looks at things to start the season probably should evolve as the season goes on. So just because you see a guy getting minutes right out of the gate doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it's going to be mid-season, because I do think there's going to be some ups and downs, bumps in the road that just come inherently with a first-time head coach. As far as what I'm working on specifically, I do obviously a lot of stuff for Lakers Nation. I'm getting ready for next season to make sure all of our post-game coverage and everything is ready to roll. And then over on the front office show, Keith Smith and I, we're still jumping on a few times a week, even during the slow time here in August, and we're breaking down all the latest news and all of that. So certainly staying busy with all of those things, and I would appreciate everybody going over and checking those out.
Well, you've been outstanding, and we hope to have you on again at some point in time during the season so we can catch up on the Lakers and all things, front office related, and folks get on over there. You can tell just by listening to him here today, the great work that they're doing over at both locations over there. So thank you very much. And that's going to do it for us today. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Andre, for doing a great job producing as usual. And thank you, listeners, for all the great feedback that you guys provide. Please go ahead and send that on in so we can continue to make this show as best as it possibly can be. That's going to do it for us. This has been Fantasy NBA Today, a Sports Ethos presentation. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, be well.